All right, everybody, welcome to the post-event panel discussion for the Client Success Customer Support Executive Brain Trust. We just had a great conversation around going beyond the metrics. What are some of the things that you should think about that could be influencing your customers that aren't in your dashboards? Jason Farrington gave a great lightning talk presentation, and then we went into breakout rooms to discuss more of this. So, Jason, I'm going to have you start off by sharing briefly what you covered, and then we're going to open it up to this panel on some of the things you discussed in your breakout groups. So, Jason, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, so our discussion at a high level was talking about performance analysis, and especially when the metrics don't tell the whole story or that much of a story. And so I kind of approached it from a consulting perspective, which is what I'm doing now. But you can also take the same approach when you're working within the walls of your company, is really just trying to think about how do you stay proactive about understanding what's going on with your business? How do you become a systems thinker to see how all the different components of your business play together to affect performance? And then how do you use both data analysis and anecdotal data from interviews to tell the whole story, interviews or skip levels, whatever is going on within your company, to tell the whole story, and then turn that into a story to share with the executive team and to actually suggest some changes. But let's see. I can leave it at that, and we can jump into things.
Let's do it. Yeah. So, after that, we kind of went into breakout rooms to discuss more of these variables and more of these factors. And I'm looking at our panel today, and it's people from all different groups. So this will be a great opportunity to hear some of the discussion that happened in breakout groups. So who wants to kick us off and kind of chat a little bit about some of your learnings in both Jason's lightning talk and also in your breakout group?
I can kick it off real quick. One of the things that I talked about in the talk was when you're looking at aggregate data, sometimes that doesn't tell you the whole story. And so if you disaggregate it, you can really see what's going on with different segments of customers and so forth. And then in our breakout group, someone brought up another example of there's certain metrics that kind of blend a bunch of different things together, and they may average out what's actually happening, NPS being one of them. The person gave an example of they had some technical issues that they think were affecting their NPS, and so they really wanted to fix those. They ended up making some other changes that improved their NPS, and it sort of masked because they actually didn't fix the technical issues. And so just that's another thing to consider, is when the metric doesn't really show what's actually going on. In this case, the metric did change back to what they wanted, but it wasn't an actual fix. And so it's really important to dig deeper and go under the hood.
Yeah, and also in your example, Jason, you showed CSAT being pretty much level, but churn was high. So CSAT wasn't telling the whole story.
Yeah, and that was also a factor of, when you're considering different segments, they're not necessarily always equal. In this particular case, it was sort of the basic level customers, mid-level, and high value customers. The high value customers, have the greatest revenue per customer, but there are a lot fewer of those customers. And so if their data is really skewed, it might not really be showing or changing the aggregate data all that much, and that's really a huge source of where people miss issues.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Jason, it's Joe Chambers. In our breakout, there was a couple of things that we had discussed. So first off, really great presentation. One of the things that we were looking at is in your very first slide that showed CSAT, the metrics were very high, but the first reaction I think the team had was, just using a number, 99%. Is that good or bad? Right. So being able to understand the number against a way to measure or a target against it. So, if I think about CSAT and it's at 99%, I don't, in and of itself, the number sounds great, but, is that good or is it bad? Is it good or bad against competition? Is it good or bad against what the customer's expectations are? Those are things that, we started to chat about. The other thing that we had talked about was not only understanding from the individual levels inside the organization, but when I look at those SLAs or KPIs, I want to start thinking about, and when I look at it, I think about is who is the audience for that. So as an example, I had an account one time, a number of years ago. The organization was very focused on call duration in one of our call centers. The goal is I want to have my agents taking as many calls as possible, and they were looking at it at productivity, and that was truly a business centric metric. But when you looked at it in total, it was actually impacting negatively the customer experience. That customer's culture was very much built around relationship. So, having our agents, working quickly to get through that call was actually not in line with their culture. So, understanding is, call duration might be great for the business from an efficiency perspective, but there's unintended consequences, and being able to look at other components and measuring various different data to get to that true story like you were talking about is really important. When you think about CSAT, to use an old term, is that a watermelon SLA? That's green on the top, but when you really dig in, you've got very unhappy customers. In my business, what I've got to look at is, how do those metrics align? So if I've got happy customers, I've got good CSAT scores, I've got great internal metrics, but then when I compare that to the other components of the business, am I losing market share? Am I losing wallet share? Am I losing customers? How do I look at that? Am I measuring the right things? Because if I've got happy customers and I'm losing revenue and I'm losing market share, I'm not so sure that they're actually that happy. So, I think a lot of this really ties into is how do you take data from various different parts of the organization and bring them together to tell that broader story.
I think it's a really good point. A couple of things I want to jump in with. One, on the CSAT front or any metric, really, like, I think one of the dangers is when things kind of look the same. We're like, all right, cool, the same. Like, I don't need to look any further into this because I don't see any problem. Maybe if there's a jump or a dip, then I might be like, okay, I should look in a little more. But that's one of the issues. But actually, I want to address one of the things you were touching on, which I think kind of opens up a different conversation, which is everything I was covering, which is the different components that can affect a performance gap. But I think what you're getting at is, are we even looking at the right metrics? Are we creating the right incentives for behavior? Are we, having our agents answer as many tickets as possible? So that's actually a whole separate thing, because that gets to your strategy. And strategy is before we even get to those components that affect the performance. So if you've got the wrong strategy, all those components can be firing on all cylinders, and you're still going to drive your company to the ground. So you got to be careful.
Absolutely.
That's the
Yeah.
primary before you even get to anything else. Do we have the right strategy? Is the right strategy to get them to answer as many tickets as possible, or is that going to hurt our customers, affect them, and make them feel like they're not getting the engagement they need? And that's a strategic conversation that needs to happen at the leadership level. And you can do some testing, you can, do some focus groups, you can do a lot of things to help craft your strategy. But I would say, you want to monitor that for sure. And if you feel like your strategy is ever off the mark, you want to correct that ASAP, because again, even if you've got everything else running perfectly, if your strategy's off, you're in a bad spot.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. And then being able to use that data to then measure against your strategy. Is your strategy aligned? And can you use that data to then make mid-course corrections or improvements, or tweak the strategy based on the feedback that you're getting from, your various different constituents?
Yeah, for sure.
so it's going to chime in on the topic with regard to one of the things that Joe had mentioned was the cross section of the AHT versus the CSAT, and are we driving to the right thing? And so there's a number of different studies out there, right? There's complexity analysis. You can take a look at doing time and motion for the AHT, so that it's not just a blanket action where you're saying, well, AHT, we see it show this correlation between higher AHT and higher CSAT, but is there's things underneath the cover of AHT that might be a area that you can cut without impacting CSAT? So is it systems that they're navigating? And we're just speaking just call center agents, right, on this example. But, you know, I think, are we asking the right questions? Because CSAT anymore is almost antiquated. I mean, you're really only getting like what at max 5%, 10% response rate. And so, you know, in the world of AI, I mean, Alan being the one setting up these calls, I'm sure you would agree. But you know, anymore, the technology allows you to sample size 100% versus doing the, you know, very small number of people that actually take the time to respond. And so being able to look across all of your contacts to see what's the sentiment, the beginning, the middle, the end. Are they entering poorly and then exiting positively? You know, so that you can actually get to maybe more of the lead measures than focusing on the lag measures. And so one of the things that we talked about in our call is like, if you come to our centers, what are you going to be focused on? Is it us getting to start a shift huddle and going, great guys, you know, we hit 99% and we can all lay back, right? Or are we talking about the things that may impact? And so, you know, talking about those lead measures, those seemingly insignificant things, but they ultimately result in a better experience. And like I said, CSAT, what I've seen a lot of the clients doing is moving away from that and talking more about customer sentiment, because we're able to monitor more of the volume, and that's the topic. It's not necessarily customer CSAT, but, you know, what is the feel of the conversation as it's happening?
I think you're right on point, Michael. You know, I think especially with the advances we're seeing in AI and just analytics in general, it's a lot easier to do a lot of more of this analysis, and so you can figure out, you know, what is the sentiment and gather some data around that. But you can also really dig in more. You were mentioning AHT, like, is that really an indicator of what's going on? But now we have the ability to get really granular. So you might be able to determine, you know, AHT is an indicator for one subset or this type of issue or call. AHT is incredibly important. And for the other ones, it doesn't really matter all that much. It's like within a range is okay. But for these types of critical issues, you know, AHT is by far the most important um, factor, and you want it to be, you know, as low as possible because those are critical issues. And so it's just it's now we have the ability to get again more granular. So as I kind of showed just the deaggregation, but we can really deaggregate even more and like look by issue type and look by customer segment and look by all sorts of different things and figure out what's really telling us what's happening here. I always look at metrics as kind of like gauges on an airplane. It's like, for the most part, there isn't really one that tells you everything. It's just like, okay, that tells me something. What does that mean if I consider this and also this as well? So pulling them together, and what is the comprehensive story that's starting to build for me?
Yeah, I like the anecdotal. I'm sure some of you have heard about, like, they looked at the planes from World War II, and like they only looked at the ones that had been shot down, or the ones that survived instead of the ones that were shot down. And so you have to ask, you know, maybe the opposite question. And so as we talk about things like handle time, and we say, well, lower is better, is it always? Because I've also found problems with people that have too low of handle times, or the ones that even have too high of CSATs. And you have to ask, like, what's that about? Are they maybe trying, is there maybe some, you know, we'll call it fraudulent actions? And so, you know, it's kind of like economics, you know, as you press down on this whack-a-mole, then this one pops up. And so, you know, we've seen, like, if we incent the wrong behaviors, all of a sudden, you know, we'll see great CSAT, but it's because you know, they've changed the email address on the ones that they're worried about. And so now they're only surveying the ones that are the good ones. And so, you know, I think being able to recognize that, you know, good isn't always good, is also important to do too.
Great
Yeah, I love that
points.
you brought that up. It's called survivorship bias, and it's really
Yeah, that's it. There you go.
the idea is basically, you know, they were looking at these planes and they brought all the planes back and they showed where all the damage was for all these planes. And they're like, okay, based on this, where should we put the armor? And we can't put armor on the whole plane because that will make it, unflyable. So how do we selectively put and obviously most people, their first reaction is, well, let's look at where all the most of the damage is and let's put it there. But the whole point of the exercise is that you're only seeing a very small subset of the data. You're only seeing the ones that came back. So in reality, if you looked at all of them, all the ones that didn't come back were damaged, where the ones that came back were not damaged. So they were damaged in like the cockpit and a couple other places. And so those were kill shots. And so the
Right.
answer is really to think about who didn't come back and where were they shot. So it's a great point. It's a twist of how are you looking at the data and are you considering all the right factors here and how should you potentially alter your analysis.
That is a great spot to end. Great story, great considerations. I hope y'all, thank you for sharing what happened in your breakout rooms, what you discussed, what you covered. And we hope to see you all at the next Customer Support Client Success Executive Brain Trust brought to you by Y Meadows. We'll talk to you guys next month. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.